your WESN News on the Hour. I'm Naomi Macnish. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Cadet officer's promotion case heads to trial. Low voter turnout as PNM internal elections held nationwide. 4 charged in gang assault, fraud suspects held in Port of Spain sweep. And internationally, Israel defends attacks on Iran, claims nuclear threat. Now for the details. A High Court judge has ruled that Cadet Force officer Captain Namlin Dipnarine can proceed with his lawsuit challenging his omission from a recent promotion list. On Sunday, Justice Frank C. Prasad dismissed the state's attempt to have the case struck out. Dipnarine is seeking judicial review over the October 2024 promotions, arguing he was unfairly overlooked. The court found that he filed within the required 3-month window and reasonably bypassed internal complaint procedures after failing to get a response from his commanding officer. C. Prasad also highlighted the importance of transparency in promotions within national security bodies like the Cadet Force. The case is scheduled to go on to trial in October. The state has been ordered to pay Dipnarine's legal costs. Despite rainy weather and traditional low turnout, the PNM's internal elections were held across all 41 constituencies on Saturday. Just over 100,000 members were eligible to vote, but by mid-afternoon, only a few thousand ballots had been cast. Party PRO Faris Al-Rawi, who is seeking re-election, said the party's democratic process remained strong and the day had seen a steady trickle of voters. Political leader Penelope Beckles retained her post unopposed, marking a milestone as the party's first female leader. The elections featured 2 main slates, one PNM led by Beckles and the People's Champions led by attorney Farai Hove Masaisai. The results will be formalized at the PNM Special Convention on June 29. 4 men have been charged with attempted murder and throwing corrosive liquid after a violent June 1st gang-related attack on a Venezuelan man in Belmont. Police say the suspects linked to a known gang were arrested following a targeted investigation. In a separate operation, 3 men were held with 17 suspicious credit cards and another was arrested on outstanding Tobago warrants during police exercises in Port of Spain. Internationally, Israel's ambassador to the Caribbean, Itai Badov, has defended his country's ongoing military campaign against Iran. Speaking at a regional virtual press conference on Sunday, Badov said the operation, called Rising Lion, was launched to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. He claimed Tehran has enough enriched uranium for 9 bombs, but the IAEA has estimated it could only produce 3, with no signs of weaponization. The campaign began with Israeli airstrikes on June 15th, triggering deadly Iranian missile retaliation. The U.S. forces joined the conflict on June 22nd, targeting Iranian nuclear sites, a move condemned by Russia and several regional governments. Iran's counterattacks have killed 24 Israelis, while Iran's health ministry says nearly 1,000 people, many civilians, have died from Israeli and U.S. strikes. Badov also blamed Iran for orchestrating attacks through regional proxies, including Hezbollah and the Houthis. Talks to revive the Iran nuclear deal have since stalled, and Iran may exit the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi Macnish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we kind of have a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man is being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happening in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI, worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
WESN.
Well, it's another day in paradise. A little overcast. Hopefully we don't get too much rain. Show Michael Smollett, this is Talking Point. One of the things I want to start off doesn't have a lot to talk about. It's just, you know, to some extent, one of those low-hanging fruit situations that the TTPS has mentioned. Granted, in this case, it's a non-national. It's a foreigner, a migrant, whether legal or illegal. I'm not entirely sure if that's made clear. But the story goes into the fact that someone, because I'm not entirely sure if it's the person that was arrested, a 33-year-old woman, Dominican Republic national, was arrested because police officers found a rifle hidden under the mattress in a baby's crib. And these are just one of those things where the TTPS has warned people, don't hide no weapons for nobody. But I think it takes it up a next level of hiding it under the baby's mattress because nothing ever went wrong. I don't know. I don't know what to say, right? 100 rounds of 5.56 ammunition as well, that's... And to what extent now should we be okay in society where people are using their kids to be shields? I know it's done, but still. To be shields with regards to their crime. Meanwhile, one last thing I want to mention before I welcome my guest. What I have anticipated since the election results has to some extent come to pass. Now, of course, there's no final pronouncement just yet on the matter, but the Commissioner of Police basically confirmed that there will be an investigation into what some might call the Brent Thomas affair with regards to his abduction from the island of Barbados. And that, of course, will include DCP Martin. Now, again, it's an investigation. The standard is innocent until proven guilty. We'll have to see what comes out of it. But it only took, I believe, about 6 days for the new commissioner to finally turn his attention to that, because that was one of those things. I'm not saying that she's guilty. I'm saying we need answers and a resolution, whether she's innocent or guilty, because that whole specter hanging over the head of the TTPS was not very healthy, particularly with what happened recently with the commissioner, with the then commissioner of police at the start of the year. Now, with that said, to continue the conversations further into the realm of politics, we have geopolitical scientists and frequent contributor to the station, Dr. Shane Mohammed. Welcome back to Talking Point. Check to see if you're muted.
I apologize. I said yes. I was saying that you don't sound too excited because I'm not in the station with you, but I'll make it up. I promise.
Yeah, it's not the same. It's not the same. You know.
I know.
No.
I know. But that's the side of you don't like too much back.
Well, so there's a lot to get through because, ironically, it seems as though the politics wants drama, even when arguably there should be a time when things should be straightforward and relatively drama-free, because both sides have not really had much time to settle into their roles, right, and to really understand where it is they are coming from, what it is they could do or not do. And in the case of the government, we just had the mid-year budget review, where I think there was some talk that maybe we'll get to see the government's approach to how they'll handle the country moving forward, even though this is a mid-year review and not a whole budget that they're presenting. And coming out of it, while there have been some clues and hints, I think, with regards to how they're going to approach things, I don't think we really saw like any ridiculously big swings that will cement, this is the direction, this is the type of policy, this is the type of approach. We didn't necessarily see anything too aggressive, and in part it could be because they didn't have much time. What did you make of what has been said by the government with regards to the mid-year review and the, I guess you could say, the update on our finances and how they intend to get us to the next budget? What did you make of it?
So my approach to this whole thing is because exactly what you've said, because hasn't been a lot of time for them to set a policy agenda specifically as to what we can look forward to going forward as cemented policy decisions, save and except for their position on the TTRA, their position on the Children's Life Fund, which interestingly enough, I have an issue with regard to comments made by those on the opposition side, those on the independent bench side, and I'll come to that. But so, and the laptops, we've heard about laptops. So things that they would have promised the country on the election trail is things we heard about from a policy perspective. But you're right. Every time I think about it, it's only been about 42 days, 45 days, and counting. So anywhere between we're in the 7th, approaching the 8th week of them being in government. So in 4 days' time, it would be 2 months. And there's a lot that can be done in 2 months, taking into consideration that this is an administration that is coming in after 10 years of being in opposition. What I did find interesting is that they used the mid-year review and the mid-year review to indicate that this $3.1 billion that they're seeking as a supplemental appropriation is as a result of shortfalls of under budgeting by the former administration. And therefore, in order to carry through with commitments of the last financial year, all the way to September 30th, this is what is necessary. I did not see it as being something exorbitant. I did not see it as extraordinary, unreasonable, and I can't say that there's something that I flagged that raised my eyebrow to ask why or what, because I also believe that one of the key aspects of going into administration, going into government, so long after and inheriting operations after 10 years, is that you have to, as we spoke before, go on a fact-finding mission and ask critical questions of what, how, why, when, who, that sort of thing. And that, I believe, has been effectively done. What I'm looking forward to is, now that we've crossed the hurdle, I gather we finished the debate went late into last night. I'm not sure if they're coming back tomorrow, or today. But when it is wound up and it's finished and it goes to the Senate and it's ratified, I now want to see what do we look forward to in terms of a governance perspective for the next 6 months and as we enter the next financial year that begins on October 1st.
Well, so one of the things that I find very interesting was that the opposition are trying to make a big deal out of the fact that the deficit is ballooning. But on one hand, again, it's been less than 2 months, so to what extent is it the responsibility of the government where they find the deficit? And on the other hand, if my memory serves correct, and every now and then I do look for the articles from last year, we were in a not too dissimilar situation with a not too dissimilar budget deficit coming out of the mid-year budget review last year, where it was, again, we ended up, it should have been a $5 billion deficit for last year, and it ended up being $9 billion, and somehow then Minister Imbert was fine with it, but now he has a very serious problem with the $9 billion deficit. Now, to some extent, the timing of the matters, because there are other things that I want to get through with the timing of the matters, but are people maybe losing sight of the fact that, look, we can't just judge things out of context. The current administration haven't had a chance really to do anything, and the previous administration had a similar budget deficit. Somehow it's better when they do it, but not so good when the UNC does it.
Well, there's a good and a bad to this, right? The question that we're asking ourselves is, well, one of the questions that we would ask is, have we recognized why there has been consistent deficit budgeting? And we have to look at, and I'm not an economist, and I don't want to venture into the economics aspect of it, but where it comes into is, what are the socio-political issues that are aligned to deficit budgeting? And I think one of those things that we have to be mindful of is, what was the performance of, and coming out of lectures last night, I still have it in my head, but what was the key performance indicators that we look for as a people, as laymen? What are the key performance indicators that we look for in terms of how to position and to infer how the economy is working and how it's functioning? And when you look at it from a layman's term and from a political perspective, not going into the high language of the economics, but there were simple things that seemed to be easily rectified by being grounded as a minister and understanding the needs of common folk, general issues that affect, and when I say common folk, I mean all of us as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, that would take a level of productivity, a little bit of financial responsibility in order to get the results. So, for example, that the low hang, I see that as low hanging fruit. Then the fruit that is on the top of the mango tree that I will discuss now is what did the government do, the former administration do, to generate activity in the economy that allowed us to generate revenue to the point where the revenue is very robust and encouraging for us to close that deficit budgeting.
Well, therein lies, however, one of the unanswered questions with regards to where's the government going to find the money? And it's one of those things where it's kind of tempting, because even the opposition did it. Hey, you're going to go in the HSF. Hey, you're going to take out loans. And to some extent, I understand that the UNC and opposition did hammer you when you were in government for doing these things. So now its turnaround is fair play. Except, again, we've only been here for about 7 weeks, as you said. So we do need to get us from point A to point B and not have the whole situation collapse. But at the end of the day, in the long run, I'm not too sure if enough may have been said. As much as the TTMA said they like what they heard about diversification, but I found that it wasn't detailed enough. And maybe that criticism with regards to the presentation, there's some validity with that. There maybe was not enough details, so we're still having to wait for the next budget, and maybe that's just the practical reality of it. But some of the things that were said, like, I'm left wondering, are we going to be borrowing for the next, 3 months? You know, I can't imagine that they'll be ready with a budget in September. That might be too soon. Maybe they will. So has there been enough to assuage your fears on those fronts there? Because right now it seems that some of the campaign promises, they're kind of holding off just a little bit. They didn't dive straight into labor negotiations on wage increases starting from 10%. And I appreciate the fact that they didn't just jump straight into that.
I don't think it would have been smart for them to jump straight into it, because 2 months into a government and having to unravel and unwrap the 10 years of governance. And people will probably ask, so why am I honing in and I keep making reference to the 10 years of governance? It's because 10 years of governance is like an extra large onion, that there are layers and layers and layers that you have to unravel and unwrap to be able to find facts and to be able to position the country in the direction that you want it to go. So when you start peeling back and discovering, well, one of the questions would be, was there wastage of funds? Was there mismanagement of funds? What are we going to do if we ignore that there was? How do you deal with that? Is it that we just say, oh well, and we write it off? But that is revenue lost. That is money in our pocket as a country lost to frivolity and things that were not done effectively and efficiently in terms of service to country. And therefore, we have to reference and pivot that 10 years against 8 weeks. And obviously that's not a sign of equality, that's not equity, that's not understanding, it's not rational. Generally, it's not rational. And therefore, as it pertains to your diversification question, I will also say that I don't think that diversification to the extent that you and myself and people like Indira Sajuan and Karen Nunes-Teixeira and others will talk about is what can be presented at a mid-year budget review. And therefore, I am going to wait to see how much discussion is and how much money is allocated and what policy frameworks are brought into the discussion come September, when the national budget for the fiscal 25-26 is read, as it pertains to diversification, energy diversification, agriculture diversification, innovation in agriculture, innovation in energy, innovation in all areas, that manufacturing, every single sector, trade, industry, tourism, all of these avenues and all of these ministries that I will say are cluster ministries where we can make money going forward, short, medium, and long term. And so that's where I am and where we are now, in my opinion, because this was a fact finding, this was supplemental, this was we need to move around money, we need to allocate money because there are shortfalls, and 3.1 billion is in 2 months for the next 4 months, maybe June, July, August, September, 3 months for the next 3 months. $1 billion a month, which includes Tobago. Well, let's see what happens with the possibility. And again, Dr. Minala said it. Another man's tragedies or downfalls is not something that we celebrate, but all that is happening. I call it I was making reference to it this morning with a friend of mine, with regard to how does the wealth of nations arise, and the wealth of nations over the last from World War I to now, it seems that wealth of nations is pivoted against the decline of other nations through wars and proxy wars. And therefore, if there isn't a ceasefire between Israel and Iran in the next couple of days, in the next week or so, then there are specific countries in the world from a geopolitical and geoeconomic perspective that are poised to win, while others would lose. And that's just how the system geopolitical of current geopolitics has worked since the institution of the Bretton Woods institutions in 1945.
Let's hold off on the international talk maybe towards the end, because there's room for speculation there. But with regards to what you just said, though, energy prices, of course, Dr. Mulal did say, it's reported, he expects revenues to go up. In fact, I actually was quite surprised that the Minister of Finance said, while the price of oil, in his presentation, he said it was at the time $66 per barrel, which I believe is lower than the budgeted estimate of $70-something per barrel. He did say the price of gas per MMBTU was $5, which is significantly higher than the $3.50, $3.70.
Yeah, that confused me. So I would not lie, that confused me.
Because, right, that's where I'm going to. Some of what the minister, I mean, now we go to the part where I have a lot of questions. Some of what the minister said, some of the details that he gave, I'm just kind of wondering, what $30 billion did the Auditor General speak about? I can't actually find it in the report. Now, I will be the first to admit, it's not as though I read the whole report and understood it fully, right? That thing, I did accounts up to Form 6. That is not enough for me. Maybe it is enough for other people. I'm not going to begin to say that I could interpret and read and fully understand the audited accounts of the country, right? I ain't on that level. But with that said, based on what I do know, I had a hard time trying to verify some of the things that the Minister of Finance said. He repeated the claim about the $5 billion in bad contracts, when again, it's not necessarily to say that the $5 billion were just disappeared in a black hole. But that's one of the things, and the previous administration, to be fair, kind of did this as well, where with the presentations and all of the different communications on the economy and the government matters, we're not given a clear picture of how it all fits, because you just said $3.1 billion for the next 3 months. But didn't the government, when one of their first press conferences, basically say the wage bill per month was $2 billion? Maybe I was wrong about that. So there's a lot of questions there. I have a follow-up question with regards to that. But with regard to the Minister of Finance, I'm not necessarily confident. While politically it might have been somewhat effective, I wish there was more clarity in what he had to say. And I'm left with more questions rather than assurances on certain key aspects. What do you make of those statements, those details that he gave? Do you think it was clear enough, or did it leave you asking for more?
I mean, again, the entire presentation of this budget, the entire presentation of the mid-year review, is pivoted on everybody on a high coming off a general election, and obviously there were elements of the debate that was a continuation of what didn't finish on the platform and what has not been said since the general election. And this is a time to, as we like to say, it was an opportunity for those who won to ramage on those who lost and say, well, you didn't do X, Y, or Z. And then support that, but with evidence of, for example, in Philip Watt's presentation, he was calling names and saying, you know, that these people received X amount of money for a position in the Ministry of Youth and National Service. But when you look at the positions, some of it is a lot of frivolous positions for a lot of money. It makes you wonder. When the Ministry of Youth and National Service was created, the very first time under Keith Rowley, I did ask the question about what exactly is national service and is national service. In my opinion, national service is across the board. It's not specific to youth. It is national service in terms of service to country, service on boards, service on enterprises, service to people. So national service across the board. So these programs that were created under Youth and National Service, not discounting that the programs were good programs, I would be one of the first to say that those programs, if managed well and effectively, can yield good results. The problem is that I was reading an article last night where some of the things that were promised were not delivered, and I saw a figure of $134 million not, not effectively spent. So again, even in reading articles in the newspapers to figure out where I missed some of the proceedings over the day, yes, there are matters that I'm questioned, that I'm not sure what the follow-up to it is. I have not seen the depth of the Auditor General's report. The $30 billion that is being spoken of, somebody's going to have to talk about it at some point in time. Somebody's going to have to account for it. And I leave that to you all in the media to ask those questions. I leave that for you all to ask in the long run, because that's what the media is. Those are the questions that you all need to pick up and run with, because that's how you get the answers, not necessarily from me asking the same question. But I'm not concerned yet, because I understand the process. And as I have said to someone over and over, we have to keep reminding ourselves. But there's again, while the opposition leader indicated at the parliamentary level that the honeymoon is over, I feel as though that a honeymoon for a government that comes in after 10 years, it is fair enough to give them 90 days to get your act in order, to put your foot in on the ground, because 90 days is it's close to 100 days, so that therefore within your first 100 days there should be some evolution of or direction as to where we are headed. So for example, I could point to some of those things. We could look at the Minister of Works and Infrastructure. Yes. We could look at the Minister of Local Government and Rural Development. We could start now positioning ourselves to focus a little more on the Minister of Energy and Energy Affairs. We have to now look at the Minister of Trade, Industry and Tourism. So there are ministers now that we are going to start to look at, because that's where the policy agenda, the Minister of Agriculture, we want to see what your policy is. We know where the Minister of Education is heading, right? So again, policies that will evolve, and those policies will start to unravel from the day school closes until the day school opens, to find out how much was able to be achieved, because he's outlined the extent of work that needs to be done. Can that extent of work be completed in 8 weeks' time? The answer is no. So the question is, how much is there contingency in place? So we know there's a policy, there's a plan. We also must know there's contingencies in place and strategies to deal with those schools that may have to be worked on within the first school term from September to December. So the direction, you're starting to see an evolution in terms of where the rollout is, a more grounded approach, key deliverables.
Well,
it seems as though we have...
Hold that point there, because we need to take a break just now, but I need to get this last question in, because what I find very interesting, now leading up into the election, and I did say in the past that the government got the mandate, so you can't fault them for doing it, and this is with regards to the wage negotiations starting from 10%, et cetera, et cetera. But the opposition has somehow made it an issue, like they want to try to make it an issue, that the government is somehow preparing to start to eliminate jobs, right? Multiple members of it have spoken on this point, not during the debate, but before, which I find interesting, because from my perspective, I didn't necessarily see any indicators, even though Minister Padra did say, well, he kind of said, well, if we do it, we'll do it because, it's necessary or constructive. Well, I'm very paraphrasing very loosely with that, right? He didn't necessarily commit to anything, and he didn't commit to any details, and he didn't say that it was happening or not for sure. But I was of the opinion, I was not expecting the current administration to look to maybe cut jobs, which to some extent is one of the easiest places if you need to save money. Because again, the government presented the fact that, look, we ran May with a deficit and salaries were so much, and I believe they said 2 billion, right? I'm open to someone can call in and correct if that's wrong. Is there anything there? Because I actually wouldn't see it as a negative if the government did clean up the public labor force situation. Again, you're not looking to get rid of people who actually do the work. You're looking to get rid of the excess. And to some extent, I don't know if the opposition is maybe kind of pushing the government in a direction that in the short run might seem unpopular, but in the long run might actually be constructive and beneficial, because it goes to the point where the PNM, at least, that was one thing they didn't necessarily have the guts to touch. Even the THA, they said that they were going to do it, but we haven't really seen them do it yet. Politicians don't seem to want to risk becoming unpopular by doing what I think a lot of technocrats will say might be necessary.
Oh, okay. So we have to unpack that, right? And we have to take into consideration that I will not support, and I don't believe that you have to cut the wage bill that they might be talking about is contract work. And as I say, frivolous jobs and frivolous positions that does not have an actual purpose, but it is created for the purposes of creating jobs for party card holders. And that's a difference to the actual the actual contract framework. And there's a structure and a framework that is created and has been created since we introduced new public management into the public sector, which is what gave life to contract workers. Because so that's a framework that exists, and that's a positions that have been agreed upon from the time it became from inception and from the introduction of new public management into what we know as Weber's bureaucracy, because that's what we operate under. Weber's bureaucracy under the Westminster Whitehall model of public administration, which is the public sector, which is constitutional, and the public sector, which is under the public service rules and regulations. Now, you can freeze positions as in terms of rules that you feel may be redundant, but it's most likely that you will freeze rules in the contract position rather than freeze rules in the public service structure, because in the public service there's security of tenure, and therefore as well there's the route to promotions and that sort of thing. Now, so we have to be very careful with regard to how we dismiss workers. If you dismiss workers that were appointed on short term, and if they were appointed in positions, as I say, in frivolous positions that was created for the purposes of creating jobs, as you would see in that article that the Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs would have the list that he would have called, it is political party members. Now, that's expected, but one has to strike a balance in governance. You give some and you take some, right? And where there's a balance, it's understood. But I am the first person who wrote and challenged the former administration. Name someone out there in civil Trinidad and Tobago who was hired, who did not have a political party card and was hired for competence and not name more than one, name 10 people, because that's the issue that we have. The issue that we're having is that preference was given to persons within the political party structure of the PNM over competence of John public, and so that's an issue. So there's a balance that has to be struck. So when you talk about job cuts, I think job cuts is about those that were given jobs for the purposes of a fire. They no longer in the Senate, so we kept them out. We know that, and therefore we have to be careful there. In terms of public sector, from what I heard, there's a deficit in terms of persons holding office in the public service, especially teaching service under Teaching Service Commission. And I do know that the Prime Minister on the campaign trail, she spoke about the flaws of the Teaching Service Commission. Even the President of Trinidad and Tobago spoke to the Parliament and raise the issue of the deficiencies of the Teaching Service Commission. And therefore, a serious investigation or analysis or an assessment into the functioning, not of all service commissions, obviously, but specifically the Teaching Service Commission has to be done to find out why there has been a lack of operationalization in terms of ensuring that teachers and those in the Teaching Service Commission have been treated equally and fairly in terms of roles and functions, acting and confirmation. Because when you listen to the Minister of Education and how many positions are vacant and how many people are acting, and he akin it to Hollywood and Bollywood, the conversation about cutting jobs does not, for me, align to, it doesn't scare me, and I would employ those in the public service to ignore a conversation that speaks of cutting jobs in the public service, because there are deficiencies, people are acting. What I think there needs to be as well as it pertains to the public service is an assessment of the service to understand who has been in, who is on unpaid leave, who is on all the different leaves, for how long, so that we can move people upwards and give and allow there to be some growth and some movement of people so that promotions can happen and whatnot. And there will be a removal of this stagnation in the service and more towards motivating staff and that sort of thing. So that's where I am in my understanding as it pertains to employment.
All right. I want to take a break. When we come back, we'll switch gears just a little bit. We're going to still be on the same political dichotomy that we find ourselves in, because I have some thoughts on the opposition, and maybe the one of the underlying motivations of what they're doing maybe to try and make it make sense to myself. And we'll see if Dr. Shea Mohammed agrees after this. Stay tuned.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Switching gears to the next topic, of course, the opposition has said on more than one occasion that the honeymoon is over, which I already said I don't think it's up to them to decide when the honeymoon is over, particularly at this early stage. Now, with that said, one of the things that I find interesting, Dr. Howard, is that the narratives around the economy seemingly are more negative. And this is in part both by the government and the opposition. But that's my takeaway. My takeaway is, despite the fact that the government is trying to say, we will find a way, we will fix it, until they tell me what that way is, I'm going to be kind of worried. And it's not necessarily through any fault of their own, because again, it's only been 7 weeks, right? Now, what I find interesting is, I wonder if the reason why the opposition is saying the honeymoon is over is because as some of these things come to light, right? As much as, you know, some of it is a he said, she said, but the impression that I get is, hey, things might have been a lot worse than we thought during the last 5 to 10 years, right? Why was flooding so difficult to deal with, and now all of a sudden it doesn't seem quite that difficult, right? Like, until we do a full detailed analysis, it might be, the answers might have a lot of granularity that we're not getting through yet. But the long and short is, I'm coming out of this with questions. Was it that bad in the previous administration? Maybe it was even worse than I thought. And then it's leading me now to start to think, the reason why they want the honeymoon to be over and they want to attack prematurely, because I don't think they have the political capital to win any sort of debate in public opinion because of how they lost, but they're going through with it anyway. And it makes me wonder if they're trying to kind of obfuscate the reality, because they know the administration is going to come in, they're going to see bad things. Yes, they might overinflate a good chunk of it, some of it, or what have you. Yes, they might spend negatively what it is they find. Regardless, it's going to make the previous administration look even worse, and they need to kind of proactively counterattack and not let the narrative be controlled by the other side, because they're already so far behind. It's almost like they have nothing left to lose. They might as well put themselves out there to try to deflect and maybe respin what is being said about the economy of TNT and how the government, the state that the current government found it.
Well, you see, you're right about it, about something that I agree with you on, which is, at what point in time does the opposition? So how does the opposition judge the government by saying that the honeymoon is over? The honeymoon is over because they've gotten to 2 months. Because as far as I see it, you're not. I give you 100 days as a honeymoon period because that's an opportunity to do several things in 100 days: fact finding, getting your foot, settling down, finding your footing, understanding for those who are brand new to politics and brand new to ministries and brand new as ministers. Understanding ministerial roles, individual ministerial responsibility, collective ministerial responsibility, starting to put together the other levels of governance, which is the boards and the ambassadors and so there's I always talk about this multi-level framework of governance, which is just, it's governance of the country. It's just not the Red House, the Parliament, as in the House, it's just not the Red House, as in the Senate and the House of Representatives, the THA, and the local government bodies. It also involves the state boards and state enterprises that are revenue generators, that are trading on the stock market, that are positioned to make money as the drivers of our economic, the development and our economic, robustness. And then there's the foreign part of it, where we have agents in the form of ambassadors and high commissioners, etc., that are going to be doing representative work on an international level. So there are different levels of governance, and I expect those things to be almost finished completed within the first 3 months. In some instances, it takes 6 months to get these things in place. So for right now, I think the opposition cannot say, and are not in a position to dictate, the honeymoon period, because I would say that a honeymoon period for a new administration entering after 2 terms of a former administration should at least be 100 days, which gives them chance and opportunity to also implement short-term and medium-term policies. And that is what we're seeing. And fortunately or unfortunately, as the case may be, based on the timing of the year, historically, they are at a point where they were working on legislation. They've brought pieces of legislation, including the confirmation of a commissioner of police. And therefore, we've seen policies starting to formalize. We're not in the depths of the policy agenda just yet. That's one. Two, the PNM is very much, the PNM is very much in disarray, regardless of what they say. When you look at the body language of the opposition leader, she is coming in to take over from a party that just got real defeat in a general election. But more so, she's coming in to a party that not only just got severely defeated, but it appears to me now understanding more, and the internal politics has added to the observation, has added to the analysis, and added to the discussion, that they were so fractured that they were holding on life support even before Stuart Young assumed the prime ministership of Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, I am of the belief that, and that's why I kept challenging the opposition leader during the internal politics of the PNM. When you realize that they were broken, when you realize, because she said it, officers fell down on the job, and the party is a broken party. When exactly did you realize this? Was it in 2024? I would like to believe that it was maybe at 2023, midterm. And did any of those 6 members, especially persons who are sitting members of parliament, Senate, and or members of the House, who now make up the executive of the new executive of the party, did any of those raise concerns? Now they're never going to say, but now, given the kind of the level of defeat, the level of acrimony, the level of division, there's a serious residual kind of disdain that is existing. I mean, we've seen it from the comments from Amy Brown, the comments from Camille Robinson-Regis, the comments from LaHunt, even the comments from the opposition leader that says that the PNM remains deeply divided. Is the country in a position just yet to give the PNM a hearing? Well, the reality of it is no, and I can't, if I were to say the country should give them a hearing and they should be fair to them, I myself would be very utopian, and I would be a foolish political scientist to say the answer is yes, because then it means that I'm disconnected from what the realities that the country faced, and John Public faced, and even PNM membership and members faced under the rule of the Rowley Young administration. And therefore, the PNM in itself, and I think the opposition leader understands. That's why she hit the ground and she was listening to people ventilate. But even looking at the number of persons that voted in that internal election, right? That is less than 10% of the population, the membership that came out to vote. And as much as people like to bash the UNC, even if there was an attempt over the years, and I'm just giving for argument's sake, for balance purposes, an inflated number from the UNC, you can't inflate the number to the extent that there is a greater interest, and has been a greater interest, in UNC members to ensure that Kamala Prasad is sustained as political leader. And you have to give her credit for that, because one of the things that she's maintained is, as political leader, is that connection and that emotional connect to her followers that has kept the party, kept her in office, and has kept her consistently in office. But there's also been a greater number of people showing interest in voting in the internal election. As compared to, here you have a whole slate of persons, and you only have 7,000 people voting. Maybe, just maybe, you might have gotten more persons voting had Mrs. Beckles-Robinson not been unopposed. And therefore, there was less interest in voting for PNM members, because in their minds, she's already the political leader. She's unopposed, and she will lead the party. But what they're not understanding is the persons that have been elected on that slate, I don't know if they fully answered to the ills of their wrongdoing, has not accounted for the ills of their poor governance in their capacities as ministers.
I want to ask that because when the PNM lost to the partnership back in 2010, now I don't know what the numbers are, I didn't look it up, but I would argue that there was a bit more fervor behind Dr. Keith Rowley, in part because he was the dissenting voice within the party before the collapse, right, where they only won 12 seats, or I can't remember. If we have
12.
It was 12 then 13 now, right? But they did get more votes. Patrick Manning got 280-something thousand votes at the time as opposed to 220 now. Penelope Beckles, as you pointed out, now she wasn't necessarily someone at the forefront of the Keith Rowley administration, but but her slate includes some of the, for lack, let me just be polite, underperformers.
Leading faces.
Right? Some
Leading
of the underperformers. To be fair, Stuart Young is not there. Stuart Young is not part of it. And it seems as though some of the leading faces in the Dr. Keith Rowley administration did compete against each other for one or two positions, right? But still, she did have some of the notorious, usual suspects from that time. And I'm wondering if that is also, to some extent, kind of undermining her, because again, she says she has a mandate, but when we say that Kamala Bissessa has a mandate, right, it's because her voting numbers jumped. She got a significant majority of the voting population, right? The fact that it was only 54%, you could argue, is not because of the UNC, right, with regards to voter participation. Now, in this case, I also just see the numbers too. Yes, it's less than 7,000. No one on her slate got more than 3,000 and change of votes in a voting population of 100,000, which is alarming to me because, and it would have been interesting to see what kind of numbers would the opposition leader race get, because as Karen would point out, when she ran, I believe Dr. Keith Rowley only got like 1,700 or 10,000. It was some ridiculously low figure, but this, by the numbers, implies something even worse. So I don't know if she could say we have a mandate to unify the party, because it seems as though a lot of the party didn't really care to voice their opinion over what's going on. And this might be, would you say it's a continuation of the election where they just opted out? PNM voters opted out of the general election, and now they opted out of the internal executive election. And one of my fears, as much as I might sound like a PNM critic, is that we might literally, the institution, we're talking like, the one constant in our politics has been the PNM. The majority of the time, the PNM has been in power. How could an institution like that, fail? And yet, I think we're not there yet. We're not close to there yet, but we could see how, this is how a giant could fall. If you just take it for granted and allow these things to accumulate. Because if their voter base, usually politicians speak to their base, but their base seems to be shrinking, and I'm starting to wonder, is it worse than I think? Because I thought their communication strategy to the public is inconsistent, has been floundering, and dare I say, seemingly it disregards what the opposition leader herself tries to say.
Well, the irony behind this is that I did say this on a set in 2019 to Gatsby Dolly directly in her face. I said to her, back then I think she was Minister of Culture, but I did say to her, I said, with all due respect, your problem as a government and your problem as a minister is that you lack the ability to effectively communicate with the population. And you all treat the community, you all don't communicate, you all have a ministry of communication, and the people who is responsible for government communication is not communicating effectively, and there's a huge divide, and it's as if you all are pulling the rest of the society with you all, while you all go about on your horse race. And she took offense to it. But I continued that same problem in 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, and it collapsed in 2025. Because I remember people asking me, will the government change in 2020? And I said, well, if it should, for all intents and purposes, but it didn't. because I feel that people still didn't feel it. They didn't feel the rat. We were midway through feeling the rat. So the pressure was there, but you was hopeful that with COVID and all that, because COVID continued to be a huge narrative. And we even saw people wanting to use COVID in 2025. The COVID narrative is long dead and gone. And I continue to say it now. I said it during the election campaign. The countries across the globe suffered from COVID. COVID was not confined to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And there are countries that were worse off sociologically and economically than Trinidad and Tobago that has surged ahead and done better than us. And the question is why. In some instances, there was introspection in governance during COVID. There was assessment, there was analytics, there was data collection, because people and the governments understood that this was a grace period, and I use the word grace period sparingly here, for them to understand the circumstances, meander through it, but also governance is not about, in a government, you have various ministers. In this government, you have clusters of ministers, which makes it even more operational than functional, right? And that's more important, to be operational. Whereas in the previous administration, you had singular ministers operating as silos. How did that work out for them? Poor communication, poor governance, poor delivery, mismanagement, frustration, discord, and then it broke. Now, did the country in the 2020 period during COVID do introspection? No, because it seems as though they felt comfortable that the only thing that mattered was health and COVID. And while I say yes, COVID was important, it was an opportunity for the Ministry of Digital Transformation to work behind the scenes to get digital transformation way advanced than it had ought to have been. For example, why do we have to use international SIM cards when we travel to the United States? Now, it is because the United States during COVID upgraded its telecommunication systems. During COVID, we didn't. That's a simple example. It is an opportunity for people to sit down behind closed doors and figure out a way forward as to how do we, when we enter out of this transition out of the COVID period, whenever that may be, we should have frameworks and policies in place to start towards the diversification thrust. We should have it through investments, through agriculture, and we start that is how governance is supposed to work. But it seems as though the memo on good governance missed the previous administration. And somehow they felt that the narrative of COVID was going to save them. But COVID has long gone. Now, bring it back to this administration, however. There could a honeymoon, by the time September comes around, this government would have had to found its footing and would have had to start putting down policy agendas, and therefore their introspection is when the Parliament goes on recess, if it actually goes on recess this time. But I gather August will be the period when it goes on recess. But this is going to be the time when, as the busy season, busy period, and the urgency of the business of the houses comes to a close, that's when you also have the opportunity for ministers to also start setting their policy agendas as aligned to their, not only their campaign promises, but the overall goals and objectives of the administration. And that is why I'm saying you can't tell them that their honeymoon is over, because the honeymoon comes to an end when they come back. And they have a period, a grace period as well, of about 6 weeks between the closing of the Parliament to the reopening of the Parliament session in September and in preparation for budget. Now, in that time period, the PNM also has a grace period to regroup. The PNM also has an opportunity to sit down and do serious reflection.
So, let me answer that, because this is one of the things. This is why I said what I said at the beginning, that they're trying to do damage control, because otherwise I don't see the need to be so aggressive, particularly when, and you could tell me if you think they did it or not, but it doesn't seem to me that they did any sort of self-assessment, that they did any sort of introspection. And you're pointing out the fact that governments did it post-COVID. So they've 10 years now, they've lost the election. Now is the time, you're at your lowest. No one's gonna blame you for taking the time, like you say, to have the grace period to figure stuff out. Because based on how they're handling things and the kind of aggression that doesn't seem always well informed or well thought out, I would argue that they run the risk, if they haven't already, of losing further ground in the court of public opinion just based on how they're handling the situation as the opposition, which this is just one of those things where I don't think I ever thought it possible that we would see performance get even worse to this extent. I thought the UNC in opposition was kind of bad, but I don't think, I'm starting to have to maybe say they probably weren't this bad. And again, Kamala was able to make a government that I didn't see coming, where she brought in outsiders, but with the PNM, rather than watching how they saw their opponents pivot, change very quickly, it seems like they just want to double down on this course of action that they're stubbornly sticking to because it somehow worked for them for most of the last 10 years, but they can't come to grips that, well, but this year, a key year, it didn't work.
Sean, one of the things that it comes, again, introspection is very important and reflection is very important. And the PNM has succeeded as well as unsucceeded because it only lasts for so long with regard to what their narrative is. So therefore, obviously, after the UNC lost the election in 2015, I continue to say it, I've been saying it for quite some time now, an election that I didn't believe she deserved to lose. So I don't believe that she deserved to lose the 2015 election. And had she been given a fair chance by the population, and the population brought into the narrative and the discourse of the Prime Minister, I think given her goals and her objectives for Trinidad and Tobago, we might have been a bit better off than we were for the period 2015 to 2025 under Rowley. However, one of the key aspects of PNM propaganda, and one of their strategies, is that they create a narrative. Manning did it in the period to bring down Bastille Pandey. Manning created a narrative about Bastille Pandey and took the opportunity to launch that narrative in the aftermath of them losing the having to call a 2001 general election, having won the 2000 election. And that narrative continued all the way through to 2007. And then the narrative continued until Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar took over the party in 2009, 2010. And then they just couldn't continue the narrative anymore. She won. They created a narrative to make it look worse than it was because they targeted certain ministers. Now, I will also be to also add to that, because I'm not going to band-aid anybody. Ministers of government in that previous administration should have been more responsible, should have acted differently. Yes, they should have had a greater understanding of the mandate, of how historic it was. They squandered it. Okay, but the minister squandered it. I don't believe the prime minister squandered it, because I believe that a prime minister can carry a government. And the UNC lost. And then the PNM started the narrative that it is bad. Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar, in her own words, crafted a narrative for us to tell us what she went through during that period of what I call the political wilderness. And it is, for me, the word wilderness is aligned to the story and the journey that she embarked upon and the experience that she went through to now bringing us to this point. But to add, so why am I connecting it? Is because now the PNM seems, I listened to Gatsby Dolly in particular, and she irked me. Because she got up and she said, now while they're in charge, all they need to, and she was throwing this to the Minister of Education, right? She was throwing it at the Minister, fix the schools, fix the book grants, fix the this, fix the that. Now you're all in that chat. And I'm like, but you behaving as if, one, you're a first-time member of Parliament, so you're behaving just like Kareem herself. So you're a first-time MP. You're behaving like this is the first time you've entered into the Parliament. You are behaving as if you were not a minister for the last 10 years. You were behaving as if you were not in the government for the last 10 years. And you're behaving as if under your remit, you did not have certain responsibilities. I will even add that the aggression, in my humble opinion, that the PNM is giving to the government and they like bulls charging. That's the only way for them to really and truly channel their internal feelings about how they feel about each other. So rather than kill each other in Bali's house and throw their and come across, I said this to the media and I'll say it here, the only place they seem to be united is in the parliament, because all of their frustration and anger and emotion and hurt and pain and wherever else they suffered, they are now using it to ventilate it against the government. But when in fact they really hate each other, and anybody they can say whatever they want. I said during the election they were not talking, they were not campaigning, they were throwing words, and they were and Camille Robinson Reggie says that there's no need to be so divisive, and we need to stop the divisive. But and even in a piece that I commented on, why are we behaving as if Keith Rowley should not be? Why are we behaving that he should not hold the blame? Why are we behaving as if the collapse of the PNM, the bad governance of the country, all of the flaws in governance, all the bad services? Look, I mean, let's just take, for example, the drains. Just take, for example, and credit, we have to give credit where it's due. Look at the short work, a month, let me just say a month's work, or 3 weeks of work was done between Julian John and Khadija Amin collectively working as a cluster to get things done. This didn't involve contractors. This involved ministry staff, as far as I am aware. Local government machinery, ministry machinery, coming together to do certain things, which contributed to alleviating severe flooding in the last couple of days with rainfall. And there's more to come, according to them. We have been for years saying, dredge the mouth of the Caroni and the South Urput rivers and all the major waterways that runs off into the when you land, and I was saying this to someone yesterday, when you are landing and the aircraft aligns to the runway and you fly over the Caroni, and if in the morning when you're flying over, during the day you're flying over the Caroni River, the Caroni Swamp, and you look at the mouth of the Caroni, there's an island out there. There's an island that has been created by all of the silt that has been collected at the mouth of the Caroni River over the years. What does it take for somebody to simply desilt that area? Not that you're draining out the swamp, but you are draining out, creating an avenue for there to be a quicker flow of water and surface runoff when there's heavy rainfall. I just want to make the point where they should have taken the opportunity, and they should still take the opportunity. A media person asked me if it's to burn the house down. If all they need to argue, and all they need to argue with each other and call each other out on everybody that contributed to the fall of the PNM, then do so. And if you all don't want to do that, then prepare yourself to be a set of angry birds sitting in the parliament, bickering at the government and pointing fingers when you are really the people that are responsible for where we are.
Well, I'll just say this quick, and you may or may not agree with this, but this is not what I want you to respond to. I'll just say this as, I think the PNM is more internally democratic than the UNC, but the problem is we're seeing the negatives, not the positives of that, because it's not all positive. And I guess this might be because you have some people that can't help but be passive-aggressive because, again, as you pointed out, they know not to have their aggression inside, blatantly. They always direct their aggression outside. But with that said, the mudslinging in the internal elections, I kind of believe you were implying this, or at least this is what I got as well when I saw what Camille Robertson just said. Why does it have to be so? But to some extent, isn't this kind of just the PNM's modus operandi? At some point, they can't help but be, they were a little bit better at times when a hot mic wasn't on, when they were in government, but the mudslinging is just what is done. And to some extent, why are we surprised by it? This is just a reflection on the current standard operating procedure. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to ask you to pause there because we have Diego Martin on the line, so we'll take the call. Good morning, caller, you're on air.
Good morning, Mr. Small, and to the Dr. Shane Mohammed. A quick thing on the politics. the PNM votes, I think they say it's under 7,000 or just about 7,000.
Yeah.
And Dr. Keith Rowley last election for leadership, it was 9,000. So it's a decline about 20-30%. If that is not indicative of how the population feel about the PNM at this point in time, I don't know what will tell the PNM. They are at the bottom in terms of support. This is the time for a third force. I believe Michaela might have an opportunity because she gets 25,000 votes, which is more than what the PNM supporters voting for the current leadership. More importantly, my pet subject is the TTPS. And I want to talk current issues, the investigation into the DCP I&I. I believe the TTPS is taking citizens for fools. Erla Christopher, on the 5th of May, 2023, launched an investigation into this issue with the DCPI and the Brent Thomas. Where has that investigation gone? I know they preempted it when the DCPI I investigated Erla for the rifle issues. So to come and tell me another investigation for the same issue and the police TTPS is not honest with us, because at the same time when Erla launched the investigation into the Brent Thomas, DCPI and I, the PCA also launched an investigation into that. So they only playing with our minds, because I want it to be successful, and I'm hoping the POLSC does not leave DCPI and I in a substantial position. They have to make a decision just as they made a decision on Erla. She has to move aside, go on vacation, so let the investigation. There is a whole or a lot of number of the current executive has issued to answer based on judgment against certain personnel or utterances. So the POLSC has to send them on vacation, and for the TTPS to investigate. I can tell you the promotional issue. That is a big issue. And I'm going to ask another question. The current COP, his promotion as the COP, was it based on the protocol that the judge struck down in terms of promotion as, I think it's the ASP promotion? Did he go through the same protocol where they found it was fraud, where they found people were elevated based on no examination, no thing, just based on an interview? So I have a question mark on his catapult to the COP, if it was similar to the judgment that was based on the fraud promotion. And I would like people to listen to two contributions made by two ministers, the Minister of Sport and Barry Parrott Singh, about issues in the WASA and with respect to contracts given to campaign managers, and the feeding frenzy in the Ministry of Sport with respect to former ministers, with respect to former senators. It was a feeding frenzy. I'm going to have a nice morning.
All right, thank you a lot. Now, with regards to these, first thing, I think the issue that the judge struck down was assistant superintendents, not assistant commissioners. And in this case, the commissioner was, I believe, at minimum an acting superintendent. He was not involved in that. The second thing is this, with regards to the TTPS investigation into Brent Thomas. First of all, Erla ordering an investigation. In what world am I supposed to be confident in the previous commissioner of police and anything that she did? That's point number one. I've already criticized her job performance ad nauseum on this show while defending her on the arrest and how unfair that was. With that said, point number two, Ayla was the commissioner appointed by the previous administration. And it has been acknowledged on this show, or at least it's been suspected, given the fact that police cannot just leave the country willy-nilly on their own. So at least in this case, there is reasonable logic behind the fact that Susan Martin didn't leave the country on her own. She didn't go and arrest Brent Thomas on her own authority. Most likely, unless it is proven otherwise, someone approved that adventure. Someone from the previous administration. So the appointed commissioner of the previous administration is going to look into a matter that the Barbadian government conceded was bad. And we're going to expect that investigation to get anywhere. Even Suzanne Martin's investigation in the Commissioner of Police, that seemed half-cocked, just to show that there's a combination, potentially, of political ill will and investigative inability. So why am I going to have confidence that the first bite at the apple was done in any good faith? Meanwhile, the new commissioner, you can criticize him for his merits or lack thereof, but he was appointed by the current administration who was not involved in that situation. So at the very least, there's no conflict of interest there. So I'm not going to say that he's going to be the be-all and end-all, or this investigation is going to be the be-all and end-all, right? Who knows? Maybe they get into a roadblock or they bungle it too. I have no idea. But at least I'll have a little bit more confidence with regards to this part of the process as opposed to what Ayla may or may not have done. Because notice, we heard nothing about it at some point, right? It died a natural death in the news cycle because I don't think it was meant to reach the conclusion anytime soon. But now, new administration, and that's why I was waiting for this, because I want to see what the resolution is, whether innocent or guilty. I'm not pronouncing guilt on DCP Martin, right? As much as it might be tempting to do. We have another caller. I see Dr. Mohammed. We have another caller on the line, so we'll take the call. Good morning, caller, you're on the air.
Morning, morning.
Morning.
It's not a question of innocence or guilt. Look at it. You don't understand why the police success rate is so low. Because they're focusing on doing the bidding of the politicians. They're not focusing on fighting crime. Everybody's seeking their own interest, and nobody's seeking the interest of the public. That is how I look at it. Now, what I want to find out is all the auditing investigations and you checking this where this money go and over rent paying and all this other nonsense. What is the end result? Is anybody going to be charged? Because I find, personally, the government facing back, we got to look forward. So when you look for parameters and so along, you only waste so much and so much of millions and so much of billions. Where that carrying us? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, caller. I understand, but Dr. Mohammed, the caller has called in on the past, and he basically, the long and short is he would like to see more personal liability on things like this, which that is a little bit of a slippery slope given the fact that the agents are the government, basically. But also, I think you would need to be able to prove breaches of the law if you want to see criminal investigations. Because to some extent, and this is where the rhetoric, this is where I don't like the rhetoric, particularly rhetoric coming from the Minister of Finance, because he's saying very, direct things, but can he actually prove that it is as bad as he frames it? They wasted money, fine. I'm on board with saying that. To say that they broke the law, well, no, then we need to have an investigation and evidence and go through those motions. But Parliament allows for a lot of privilege. We complained about it on the PNM. This is not new, unfortunately.
So I will say this, right? Overall, there are specific people I think the country listens to. And I don't believe for a second that the Attorney General is not a learned lawyer, because he's not senior counsel by guess. And I also know it is there for the public record that he's also an experienced Attorney General. It's not his first stint. And when, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, when Bridget Anderson George was Attorney General and resigned in her fallout with Patrick Manning, it was him, it was John Jeremy who filled the gap and continued, and therefore we have to take I think in this dispensation, the Attorney General is also serving as a voice of reasoning, as well as the legal yardstick by which the government is operating. So when the caller asked about whether the legitimacy of the appointment of the Commissioner of Police, I don't think the government is going to act illegally, and the government also, at the end of the day, has within the remit of the government as a role and function in approving or disapproving the appointment of the nomination of the Commissioner of Police. They can vote no. They can bring the motion for confirmation to the Parliament, because that's what the notice is from the President, that this person has reached the top of the list, the merit list. And if the government, upon examination of the CV, the background, etc., can come to the Parliament and say we don't agree, and therefore we are not supporting this nomination. That's a procedural part of the role and function of appointing a Commissioner of Police. So that's one. Two, I also believe that there's a lot of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed behavior by certain ministers who also want the opportunity, as I used the phrase before, to ramage in the Parliament. And yes, you have parliamentary privilege, so therefore certain words and certain phrases can be used in their gesturing and their grandering. But again, that comes down to what does and even the Attorney General says that there's things that he's going to be looking at, the government is going to be examining and will be referring to determine whether persons acted legally or illegally. That's left to be seen. But the other part of it about the minister, what the caller with regards who says he doesn't see the sense in what Paderat and what's is saying, I disagree, because here's the thing. By what's indicating that there's wastage with regard to how no, don't get me wrong. I did say that there has to be a balance. I expect that there would be people appointed for political reasons, and there are going to be persons who also are appointed on merit. So there's a balance. The issue is here when one outweighs the other, which is the political aspect, right? So with that said, this is also a good thing, because this is now the yardstick by which the country, and this is the standard that the country now holds the government. So in 1 year's time, in 2 years' time, the country can refer to these statements in Parliament, because it's on Hansard, and ask the question, you said X or Y in June of 2025, and if the country starts to see the government slipping, they have now this information, because we are now, we are intelligent people, we have information at our fingertips. You can refer back to this. You said X, Y, and Z in June 2025 when you came into office. We are now in January, February 2027. This is what the PNM is saying you have done. Prove them wrong. So it is not a bad thing. The question as to what is it going to prove, it is now holding the government at a higher standard than their predecessors. And by holding them to that standard, we are also safeguarding ourselves as well as safeguarding our expenditures. And we also now, as a society, people have a voice in which they can raise concerns. And if those concerns are not addressed effectively, the government will face the wrath of the people. That's all. Well, so this is a form of accountability. Well, this is also a standard of flag bearing.
This leads me back to a point that the first caller made, and it was something I want to ask you, because he's saying maybe it's time for a third force, and maybe this will be the window. And again,
I think there's a not 0% chance that the PNM is at risk of collapsing, which to some extent worries me because right now they're the opposition, right? But to some extent, maybe this is why what you pointed out is even more important, that it's not about being fair, so we hold this government to the same standard that we held the previous government. Obviously, we didn't like how things went back then, so we voted them out. So naturally, it might not seem fair per se, but you have to hold the new government to a higher standard, which is why when I do see, because I did it with the PDP, then PDP, now TPP, right? And I don't know if they appreciated it at the time or not, and to some extent, that's fair for me to then continue now and say, hey, I don't want to see you, Minister of Finance, doing some of the same things that maybe some PNM people did in the same position last year, the year before. I want to see you do better, so when I have concerns, it's not about whose team am I on, it's about I want to see a result. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to hold on any comments because we have Sanford on the line. Good morning, caller, on there.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Good morning, Dr. Mohammed.
Good morning, sir.
I see you looking nice and bright and bushy-tailed this morning. That's how I like to see you. You know, Sean, I listened to earlier in the program when you were speaking about the difference between the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Finance speaking about the oil prices and the gas prices.
Yeah.
Let me say this to you all about the oil price. The oil price that we receive a higher oil price than what is what you see on the markets, and that is because there is what comes out of the ground is not what we sell. There's a process that takes place, a blending. Let me put it that way. Of a particular product that is put into the crude that enhances the value of the crude. I'll say no more about that process. So that is why we get a higher price than what you see the U.S. Gulf Coast price and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The gas price is because of how we now we move away from the Mount Bellevue and the Henry Hub, and we have a new pricing mechanism that allows us to get a higher price based on where we sell as well. That being said, let me talk about this issue with the in terms of diversifying the economy. I think one of the key areas that we need to look at is when you spoke about the Ministry of Youth Development and what have gone on, National Service, what went on there. That is a key area where we need to get Mr. What's his name, Mr. Dowla, the Minister of Education, working, because one of our bright spots that is right there that we need to develop is the education sector in the technical area, which can take us out of some of this issue that we're talking about when we talk about diversification. Labor. If we are able to produce a quality labor force, that is another export that we can use to develop Trinidad and Tobago. Apart from all the other things that we talk about, agriculture, manufacturing, the oil and gas industry, our labor force, but we have to harness it. Unfortunately for me, I don't think Dr. Dowlat is I don't want to cast aspersions, but I don't think Dr. Dowlat alone, I'm going to put it this way, is the right person for the Ministry of Education right now. I think some other blood needs to be placed with Dr. Dowlat because this is a huge task to help in transforming the education system in Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Dowlat is old school education.
Mm-hmm.
We need some people with the idea of how to transform this thing. Like, for instance, what Kamaraj did when he was there in the last government, the UNC government. Somebody like that to help with the transformation. That is what I think we need to do. one other thing that I have a question for you, Dr. Mohammed. Do your lectures online, Dr. Mohammed?
I'm not hearing him 100%.
Do you lecture online?
I do.
No, are his lectures online? Like, can I log on somewhere and find Dr. Mohammed lectures and look at them?
Oh no.
Just like how they have when they have like MIT open courseware shown when you could go on and do and just watch a course and take it in and get some knowledge. Is his online? That's what I want to find out. Listen,
No.
Thanks,
Yeah.
gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll just say this. I was told by a friend of mine, certain tradesmen, he's seen it, they go abroad, they get jobs rather quick. There's something untapped there. And I don't know, maybe it's just that the market hasn't, and the market, I mean both the labor market and the education market hasn't adjusted, because usually there's a delay. And that's why market trends are trends, because the trend is pushed by the delay to some extent, and then the overcompensation that happens. But is Dr. Daulat the man to maybe see certain transitions and implement certain ideas? You might be right, a traditionalist might not be the best person, but more importantly, when you said education is a bright spot, I don't know if I would agree with you. I think that is a very pressing area of concern. Dr. Daulat hopefully will be able to right the ship to some extent, but revolutionary change as opposed to evolutionary one, we might need more people just because of the workload to try to fix that situation. Dr. Mohammed, I don't know if you have anything more to add, because you yourself was pointing out the Teaching Service Commission is one area of concern.
No, but when you have a constitutional majority, which they do, you've gotten a different level of mandate, and therefore it will be foolish in governance for you to not utilize that constitutional mandate and that constitutional majority, which is rare in these parts, and it is even more rare for a singular prime minister to get it twice, and therefore all that was not done in the first dispensation should be done, or as much as possible should be done in the second dispensation. So the conversation that we as citizens should be having is, how does the government, or what are the recommendations that the country wants to see happen with regard to how the government utilizes its constitutional majority in the development of Trinidad and Tobago's governing structure. And therefore, the Prime Minister, in her own words, and the President as well, did indicate that looking at the operations of the service commissions and the effectiveness and efficiency of the service commissions is something that should be looked upon. And therefore, there's 4 years and 45 days, as I'm told by one of my friends, to go. And therefore, whether it is, as long as it is done within that 4 years and 45 days period, we've accomplished. And that means the right to recall, if we're still on that page, the term limits for prime ministers, if we're still on that page, all of the different things that we wanted to improve. But on top of that, I believe that because there are 3 government representatives, the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Tertiary Education, the Minister of Tertiary Education, and the Minister of Education, you have greater political will to make the changes that are needed. And therefore, I expect, and I think I believe Dr. Daulat specifically is a visionary in education. When you talk to NAPS people, when you talk to NAPS boys, when you talk to parents, when you talk to that village of Naparima College and environs, so when you talk to people within the Presbyterian Church, they will tell you that there's a great expectation from Dr. Michael Daulat as Minister of Education. In fact, he was one of the first announcements in the election campaign when I said he was someone that could actually surprise everybody and beat Faris, which he did. And he's a very strong candidate. I think he's an excellent choice for minister. What he does with that ministerial capacity is important. It is not impossible for him, because not only does he have the political will and manpower required, he can also get buy-in with proper communication, discussion. And having been an educator for many years, he's really in a good position to make the changes that is necessary. I also expect changes to be made in the health sector and improvements to the operations of hospitals, how we deal with, how we provide services to the society, coming out of the health sector through the RHAs. I mean, I would like to see greater innovation in terms of the operations of the RHA. But again, that's the kind of discussions that we want to have. And therefore, when people have mandates and rare mandates of this level, we should not squander it. Because, again, I will say this. The success, and why I say there's no space for a third party at this stage, is because in the absence of where there's the PNM is a party we cannot underestimate. The PNM has come back from 33-3. They have come back from 29-12. So nothing prevents them from coming back from 28-13. The thing about it is this. Even if Penelope Beckles is not successful in her leadership of the PNM, there's always going to be a Amory Brown and a Stuart Young and a Marvin Gonzalez and a somebody waiting on the side to become the next political leader of the party. And that's the thing about the PNM. There's always, and also in the UNC, I mean, there's always going to be somebody to, I mean, the country, I am waiting to see who becomes, and when that opportunity arises, who acts as prime minister. That's something I'm looking forward to seeing, because then that tells me the direction of the country, and that tells me the direction of the party, right? The same is where in terms of the PNM specifically in opposition, the PNM will not die, and the PNM will not die because the success of the PNM is also dependent on the failures of the government, and if they don't realize that from 2010 to 2015, then they're living in la la land. And they're living in a utopian reality.
This is the government you're saying, if the government doesn't learn from 2010?
Yes, if this government does not learn from the 2010 to 15 period, where the 29-12 did not cause them to sustain itself for a second term because of what they did or did not do, and the PNM came back into office, the same thing applies now, that the success of this government will determine the success or failure of the PNM. The failure of the government, however, is directly linked to the success of the PNM. So it's a yin and yang. And so therefore we can't just rule it out just like that. Third forces, has Michaela Pandey, let's go with that name. Has Michaela Pandey indicated an interest in becoming a third force, a serious third force in the aftermath of the 2025 general election with 20,000 votes? The answer is no. Because at what point in the last 7 weeks or 8 weeks has Michaela Pandey emerged to contribute to the national discourse? At no point.
Yeah. I mean, we will more or less have to close there, but I just want to, add to what you just said. If it is that the PNM finds new life only because of the failings of the current UNC administration, so they become the alternative by default, we have to pick you, I'll be very disappointed. I have no issue if the PNM rises to the occasion and outright beats the UNC. Of course, they'll have to prove that for me to believe that it could happen, right? But I would rather see that. I would rather see one party beat the other party because they were better. It could be the UNC beating the PNM again because they were better, rather than by default, well, the incumbent is bad, so we had to vote in the other guy. Because to some extent, that's the problem we got, I would argue, potentially with the last PNM administration. The partnership was to some extent perceived to be bad, so we voted in you, and look at what we got. And therein lies the other part, though. I don't think this is similar to the partnership. I think this cabinet is to some extent very different than the last cabinet, so I have reason to hope, but again, now will we realize something better? Hopefully we will, but we have to wait and see. Folks, I want to thank the callers. I want to thank Dr. Mohammed for joining me once again to have a spirited discussion. This is Talking Point on WSN Decon and Capital. Just want to remind you to stay safe. Make today a good day. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. And hopefully then you will engage responsibly in our political discourse. But never forget, no matter what, it's nice to be nice. Whether you're on your road, whether it's a political adversary, whether it's just somebody that you don't like, still be nice to them so that we could see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private healthcare affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Struggling with heart health or frequent migraines? Discover the simple steps to reclaim your energy and vitality.
We're diving into a topic that affects about 422 million people around the world: diabetes.
Tune into Wellness Unlocked, the series that delivers expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and well-being. Your health matters. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool